is a little bit today. So I want to start off. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Yeah? Am I good? Yeah. I want to start off with a story. Right? So story I kind of want to talk about is when I was 7, I used to like going to this park by my house. It was in Jamaica, Kingston. And I had a cousin who would tell me about like this thing that they did, this place that they liked that we always visit. It was called, I can't remember, Edgewater is what it was called. Miss Arrow, catch. Think fast, catch it. I also enjoyed fishing. My uncle used to take me when I was 6. Can you come over here and help me with this, please? I can't figure out how to actually put that on. But anyways, while Miss Averill helps me with that, so I was saying about my cousin. I used to go fishing. Is it staying? No? Yep. We're good? Nope. Do it again. Thanks. When we used to go fishing, I used to like to catch this sprat thing. No? It's okay. It's okay. It's all right. Is everybody confused what I'm doing? Yes.
We're following.
Is everybody you're confused what's happening? Are you confused? You don't know what's happening here.
I'm so upside down right now. But
Yeah. Who else is feeling very confused? I can't see anybody, but can anybody just say, I'm confused as to what is happening? Can anybody tell me the story that I just said?
Something about fishing in Jamaica.
Okay.
Yeah, I got
anybody
that
else can tell me the story? In its entirety. I want from start to finish the story, everything. Who's gonna tell me the story? Show me about the ball.
Yeah.
Nobody? What I just showed you is a visual representation of how your bias works. It's hard to hear what someone is saying when all you can see is what is in front of you. What you have been told, what you have been taught, what you have been primed to think. It's hard to say, I'm going to, in this moment, hear and see and feel what I'm supposed to hear, see, and feel when we have this going on. We have this going on. And even if you decide that, you know what, maybe I need to see and hear something differently. We have our family and friends who comes and reassures that our conscious is exactly what we should be thinking. And I wanted to do this presentation and start off because this is how I want us to get the attention of how easy the mind has been primed over years, not only through your lifetime, but your ancestors and the people before you lifetime. How conscious and unconscious bias, which everybody has, is so easy to obtain. So this was supposed to start off with that representation. So, next slide, please. With that being said, this, I know we have a PowerPoint up here, and it is a presentation because you're seeing something. But what I really want us to have is to be able to have a conversation. Now, I know it's going to be hard because everybody's not in the room, and it's not very interactive because what I'm really looking at is the slides that is up here. So I'm going to depend on those in the room to really be more interactive, but this is an opportunity to know that this is not a presentation. I'm not talking at you. I want to be able to talk with you. And hopefully after we have this conversation and you leave, and for the rest of the day and for the rest of your life, you could take something away from this that is going to change the way you view things and change the way you operate when you're doing things concerning bias, particularly racist bias. So The next exercise I want everybody to do is what is your dominant hand? Left, right hand. Take everybody who's watching, who got the orders from Ms. Averill, I want you to take your non-dominant hand, and I want you to take the piece of papers that I asked everybody to, Ms. Averill, to prepare, and I want you to hold it in your hand. Flat, put your palms flat, and hold all the paper, all of them. Stack them all in your hand. So this is your non-dominant hand. And I want you to try to crush, without using your other hand, make a ball.
Oh, easy.
Go ahead, try.
Am I doing this wrong, Amber?
No, try, make a ball. Everybody who's doing it, I hope everybody should be doing this. I know I can't see, I'm like a teacher that can't see you on Zoom.
I like push the side.
Try.
Yeah, shimmy it.
Super tight, tight as you possibly can. Crush it, everything you put into it. Yeah, tight, make it, I want to see it as tight as possible. Spectre got it going on. And it's struggling. Struggle, but try. Keep going. Okay. So once you've crushed your ball, what I want you to do now is to throw the ball, if you're in your car, wherever you are, put it as far as possibly away that you can. Just chuck it. Chuck it somewhere. Out, far. Chuck it out. There we go. What those papers represent is two things. One, that is how hard it is to unlearn something you've been taught all your life. You're trying to use your non-dominant self to control and unlearn something that you sometimes don't even know what's inside of you. But it was possible. We did it. Probably not to your best, what you would want it to look like, but it was done. And why it was done is because you attempted it. It wasn't about just the result. You attempted to do what was right. And then by chucking it across the room, that was you chucking all your pride, all your academia, all your knowledge, all your authority, all the things that you thought you knew that is going to be a barrier between hearing what I have to say today. That is you promising to put it aside. And every time as we go through this process, as you feel like, I feel like I'm being attacked. Oh, I feel like my character is being questioned. Oh, I feel like, no, but according to the test book, remember this paper you just chucked. That is what that represents. So as we see here, this is a quote that I made up in my shower because that's where all my brilliant ideas come from. Self-growth only happens when there's self-accountability. But the thing about growth is that we often think growth is like this. But what growth is really is like this. Because what you're trying to do is unlearn, identify, and manage all the things in whatever intersectionality, whatever you're trying to undo, whatever you're trying to be disciplined about, you are trying to undo yourself, questioning your character, questioning what you thought was true, questioning all the things that you thought was about you. That is what self-growth is. And what we have seen, what I have seen oftentimes happen is that people become results-driven instead of change-focused. So we get into this conversation of how can we create this policy? How can we make this procedure? How can we do this? This is the deadline. This is this. And it becomes a formality and another check in the box, and it becomes performative. And a year or two or 10 or 15 or next week or the next minute, the same thing is happening because we're all so quick to want to see change, but not trying to administer change to ourselves. So as we go through this conversation, I want us to be able, like I said, to chuck aside all the things that you've known, because I'm going to introduce to you new topics, new ideas that you might have heard before. You might have. I think I'm brilliant. Maybe you have heard this before, but you will hear from my mouth today. I want you to take everything that you thought you knew or you thought you knew about yourself and put it aside for the next hour and however minute. Also, I want at any moment, if you have a question, please ask. I hate when people wait till the end and then is asking questions. If you're confused, if you have a question, ask now, because at this moment, as I stand here on this mark that Miss Katie made for me, I am standing here as first a human being. I know Ms. Avril introduced me as an activist, and clearly I'm a Black woman, and so many things so many offices that I hold. But today, I am a human being first. And because of that, I want people to feel comfortable in asking the questions, because it's best to ask them in this room and share them with me than you might share it with someone that isn't as palatable, that isn't going to look at the side of humanity first, that isn't going to see that you really just want to know and learn, but is going to see the offense first. Now, I see it, but my whole duty is to help to guide people through exploring to get them on the other side. Because at the end of the day, by getting you on the other side is what is going to benefit the community, right? So this is going to be a journey that we're going down, and I'm going to break down and build upon some stuff. So we're going to go to the next slide. So I know the title of the presentation was calling this Exploring Racial Bias. But before we go into racial bias and jumping into that, let's look at what a bias is. Because what has happened, we typically fast forward and we want to go into this, but in order to understand C, you have to first know A, right? Because it's an addition of things. Now, bias causes you to feel prejudice in the favor or against a thing, a person, or a group. That's the noun. A verb causes you to show inclination or prejudice for or against someone or something. Now, the reason why it was important for me to break down in looking at feeling and looking at action is because of the next slide, breaking down bias. When something causes you to feel a particular way about something or someone, it is implicit bias, also known as famously called unconscious bias. A lot of people want to stay there. It's easy to just talk about my unconscious bias because it really does. If I'm going to be honest with everybody, it allows you not to be accountable. Well, I said that because it was an unconscious bias. But look at what the next thing says. When you show or say something, say your inclination or prejudice, it is explicit bias, which is a conscious bias. Now, the problem with the word explicit, it has so much negative derogatory attached to it that people don't want to say, this is an explicit bias. This is something that I actually think. This is a conscious bias. It's so much easier to stay in the implicit part. But newsflash, everybody has explicit biases. Everybody has implicit biases. This is not just for some people. This is everybody. It is as easy to have a bias as it is easy as you to breathe. I just showed you. You didn't even know what I was doing, but you're biased in that moment at like, I can't even hear what she's saying because all I'm seeing is what she's doing. And what I'm doing is oftentimes already associated or primed for you to think like, this looks crazy. You know what I mean? Is everybody with me so far? Okay, so when something causes you to feel a particular way, you don't know where the feeling is coming from, but you feel it, whether it's afraid, whether it's anger, whether it's whatever it is. That is what you call unconscious bias. You can't tell, you don't know, you're not fully aware, you can't probably articulate it, but it's there. But the minute your action, the minute it comes out of your mouth, is an explicit bias. It is no longer a part of your subconscious. It has come fully to your mind. Now, let me break this myth about explicit bias. I think when we think of the word explicit and bias, we think it's harmful right off the bat. Now understand that you, though, may have an explicit bias and you are acting in it or speaking in it, might not understand the full ramifications of it, might not understand the full impact it can cause. And that is where a lot of people struggle with owning it, because it's like, well, I didn't understand the historical context of what I just said. I didn't understand how that was going to make someone feel. I didn't understand all of these things, but it's something that you did say. And we have to own that part, right? Now that you understand that it's an explicit bias, now that you have been, you know what, Ms. Katie, you said this, and that is saying this. Instead of saying, oh no, it's an implicit bias, that's an unconscious thing. It's an opportunity now to say, oh, I didn't understand, or this is what I was told, or this is, and then you could go back in your implicit bias to be like, oh, I heard my mom said this one time, or I watched this on the news one time, or I had this experience one time. That is what you can now trace back to your implicit bias. But the minute you operate and it comes to the forefront of your mind, it's an explicit bias. Now, we're gonna go to the next slide, because I think I just explained all of that. So the process of associating stereotypes and attitudes towards a category of people without fully conscious awareness. This is also known as unconscious bias. So just remember this. If you can't remember all the things I'm saying, remember one is internal and one is external. Once it comes out of you, it's external. Once it's inside of you, it's internal. So remember those two things to make it more easier to remember. This shows up as an unconscious bias that can lead us to react through three key processes. Now, this key process, and the reason why it was so important for me to just talk about bias instead of just jumping straight to racial bias, because this idea can be taken with anything, whether it's sex, gender, religion, whatever. It's the same thing as a starting foundational basis of what implicit and explicit bias is. So implicit and explicit bias, which when you look it up on the internet, is very attached to racial bias. It's not just racial biases that we could have. We can have biases when it comes to absolutely anything. And that is why when people say, I don't have biases, like, well, how do you know, right? Really, how do you know? Because we have bias with everything, right? So we're gonna go down and looking at the three key processes of priming, association, and assumption. Next slide, please. So the first step is priming, a psychological phenomenon where a word, a sound, an image, or any type of stimulus can can be used to solicitate a response. Priming can occur through news and media, everyday experience, education, language, family, community, virtually everything and anything. You are being primed at any moment, at any age, at any time. That is how priming is so easy. It's so undetected. But then after you get primed about something, then what happens is now you start making, next slide, associations. So now I start thinking about something a way and start feeling about something a certain way. Now I start making associations based on what the priming object was associated to, right? So associations are made without conscious guidance or intention. Our associations are created and reinforced through priming. Our brains create shortcut based on how we have been primed, thus leading us to create associations. So now that we have these associations and we start thinking about a certain way or comparing two things, now we start making, next slide, an assumption. As soon as I'm primed to think this, and this thing is associated with this, as soon as I see this thing, I'm going to assume whatever the results are going to be or the outcome is going to be. So assumptions are made on association, whatever yours, and as we call stereotypes. Assumption is made based on association. Assumptions are dangerous because when false, can inflict harm onto someone else. And this is a fact. Assumptions can be stored in our brain as proven fact based on past experience that may have happened frequently and now has been seen as a foreseeable result. One of the number one way to solidify an assumption is that you have seen it happen time and time again. So now you're like, I'm prepared for this to be the result. That is how great assumption works. So now we're going to go into the next slide. As I explained before, explicit bias, I think because of the conversation, I'm like going ahead of myself. So y'all don't pay me no mind. As long as you're learning something, we're good. Okay. So explicit bias, as we said, now refers to the attitudes and beliefs that we have about a person or group on a conscious level. This is known as conscious bias. Now, I'm the kind of person that the same accountability I hold people at, I hold myself at. There's nothing I ask of people to do that I myself will not do. And that is why before I brought the paper, these are exercises that I created in my mind and did. And then by doing it, I was like, this is the narrative I wanted to create. I didn't find this on the internet, and I didn't see someone else do this on a TED Talks. These are things that I sat down and did it with my family and did it with my friends and saw the results and saw the same thing over and over again. So to honor that, I'm going to talk about one of my explicit bias. I'm going to break down to you a situation, how priming, association, assumption, and how an explicit bias was created for me, and how I had to not only unlearn it, but continuously manage it. Because there's a thing about processing and trying to unlearn something, you have to continuously manage it. Because incidents, like I said about assumptions, this happens when there are frequent times. So every time a situation happens, what you have been primed and what you have associated with is what you will assume that would happen. And your mind and your actions and your body will react accordingly. So when I moved to Canada, I'm from Jamaica, born and raised. And I used to live in the States, and then I moved here when I was 17. When I moved here, one of the first things that I heard from school or even my family, people that I know, was that, listen, Canada is not for Black people. You know, the only people, and I'm giving you verbatim, I'm going to be real, raw, and open with y'all right now. So that's because that's what I want. So that's what I'm going to do. The only people that gets things in Canada and that the government cares about are Indigenous people. They're the only people that people care about. They don't care about us. We can't get, even schools, we can't get into schools because, you know, we're not Indigenous. They get free schooling and all they do is take the money and they waste it on alcohol and they waste it on drugs. And these are the narratives that was put into me. Newcomer, never met an Indigenous person in my life, but before I even met them, I was told the narrative of what to expect. And then one day I'm going to school, I'm on the train, and this man is on the train and he comes on the train and he comes over to me and he stops in front of me and he was clearly intoxicated, and he was an Indigenous man, and he looked at me, he said the N-word, he said, "Get out my country. This is not your line, get out my country." And right then and there, all the priming, all the association became now an assumption that this is how all Indigenous people are, that all the things that I was told about Indigenous people are true, that this is who they are. And for a while, I held on to that because after that experience, I had another experience and I had another experience. And then it became easier that as soon as I saw somebody that was Indigenous, whether they were inebriated or not, my mind went there. And how did that change? I had to sit down one day and said, I feel like a hypocrite. Here you are saying that you're an advocate for mental wellness and that you care about people, but you never stop to think, why is it that there's a specific or set of people that is being associated with alcohol and drug abuse and homelessness? Why is this a thing? I had to first want to identify where this unconscious bias and why do I feel this way? So I went on YouTube and I searched up about residential schools. And that led me to more information and more information. And I read the stories of people who went through that. And I started reading, because when I did grade 12 here. That wasn't a topic taught in school. It was like brushed over. Just like how when they talked about slavery, it was like, now everybody, I'm gonna say a word, don't repeat it. And then they said the N-word. And then every white or non-Black kid in the school would turn and look at me in the class to see how I'd feel. That is how Indigenous history was taught as well. So I had to go searching for the truth. And once I started discovering the truth and realizing all the generational trauma and ancestral trauma these people had to go through and how they were treated in the movies, how they were depicted and all these things. And I could start correlating it to even my ancestor. Now, let me tell you this. My last name is Porter, which is the name of my great-great-great-grandfather's slave owner. My grandmother on both my parents' side are Maroons, which are the warrior women that when the British soldiers came to the Caribbean, they used to bring the people up in the mountains and fought with the British soldiers and created camps. My grandmothers are both 6'2", 6'1", tall, dark-skinned, long, black hair women. So I come from a line. So when I talk about my ancestors, I literally mean my ancestors. My family comes from our Maroons, which are tribes that come from Ghana, the Ashanti tribe. So this is things that I know and lived through, right? So when I start correlating that back to what my people, my ancestors gone through and see that, the empathy and the respect that I didn't have before started to come. And the way I view people and started to, we call it macro aggression. We're putting all people into one circle. We know we talk about microaggression all the time, but macro is when you put a whole group of people together. I started to unlearn and manage that. Because since watching those residential school videos, since meeting Indigenous people, since having conversations, I've also still had those experiences. But now can I say this is how people are? Because now I know better, so I do better, right? Moving on. So when we look at now racial bias, and the reason why, like I said, I went to bias first, because I want to make the clear understanding that when we talk about implicit and explicit bias, you're not only talking about racial bias. It has been a shortcut that we've been taught for this last year, that once we talk about implicit, we're talking about race, we're not. We could talk about anything when we talk about implicit and explicit. Okay, all right, we got it. Now, racial bias. Racial bias is when bias is centered around a person's race. If the bias is not centered around my race, it isn't racial bias. That's just, it's easy, but I'm just gonna let y'all know. But the biggest thing that why racial bias has always been a thing that is like kind of just shimmied through as being like, no, it's not all that bad, is because racial compliments. As we go back to the first slide where we talk about favor or prejudice, a lot of people think because I'm giving you a compliment that it isn't bias, it's preference. Like, for example, I'm gonna just be real again. I've always found it problematic. Now, I can't tell nobody who to love, but I found it very problematic when I would have a non-Black person, a non-Black man tell me, you know, I just like Black girls. The first thing I'm thinking is colonizer. Hold on. Why is it that you just like me? What is about me that is so different than other women? Now, you could say you like me, and you like my attitude and you like how I act, but how Shu acts is not how all Black women act. How Shu dress is not how all Black women dress. So when you say, I just like Black women, it's feeling a little slavery to me. You know, that's just my opinion. That's just how I feel about it. So it's just something that I find problematic. Like, you could just like who you like, but once you bring my color into it, it becomes problematic to me. So if anybody's doing that, see me out there, stop doing it. Not good. So now when we look at racial compliments, now the problem with racial compliments, and we're gonna go to the next slide, Miss Katie, is that even though you're like, what's the problem with that? You know, beautiful, naturally athletic, naturally talented singer, Jamaican, Usain Bolt, naturally fast. I can't run to save my life. That's a lie. Not all of us are. Naturally talented singer. I wish I could sing. The only place I could sing good is in the shower, to be real with you. So a lot of these racial compliments, comes from appropriation of culture. Then it also creates an illogical expectation of the person, because now when you see me, because I'm Jamaican, I must know how to run. I must know how to, I can dance, just so you know. I was the head cheerleader of my school. I can't sing, I'm not naturally fast, I'm not athletic, and I would think I'm beautiful, but these are things that actually perpetuate hypersexualization. Fetishes, that's what I talk about. I only like Black girls, that's a fetish. Because now, when you tell me you only like Black girls, I'm looking at you like, but why? That's a fetish. So it's not a preference. You have to look into yourself as to why I say I prefer Black women. What are the qualities that I'm associating with Black women that white women or any other women don't have? And you have to debunk that. Because even though it might be with good intentions, to the right person, which is me, it's gonna have the wrong impact, right? So I kind of want to back up a little bit because I forgot that I wanted to tell this story. I think it's a super funny story. I'm gonna tell a real story, no gimmicks this time. So my aunt in about 2015, we were driving and she just randomly said to me, you know what? You're gonna get married to a white police officer. I almost crashed. I was shocked. Just out of the blue, she said, you're gonna get married to a white, tall, he's gonna be a very, like she was going into his character. But I stopped at police, to be real with you, because the first thing that crossed my mind is like, how am I going to even meet a police officer? Like, I'd be dodging and ducking from police officers to meet one. So clearly, he could not necessarily have to be in uniform. He goes to grocery stores. I don't know why I thought police officers were just on the streets and never went anywhere else. So that, but two, I thought about, I can't foresee living a life where every night I worry if my husband is going to come home. That this is someone who is taking on a job that is saying that I will sacrifice my life in the line of duty. That he could go to work with the greatest intentions and not come home. Really, that's where my mind was stuck. And the reason why I'm glad it came back to my mind before I continue, because I want everyone to understand that I understand the position that you're in, being in the job that you're in. Knowing that if you're a person that is of honor and integrity and want to do right by people in the community, and knowing that you go out there knowing every day that you might not come home, and then you're being told you're a racist, you're this, you're all these things, how hard that is to crush that paper and chug it across the room. Because when my aunt tried to prophesy over my life, that is what I thought about. So the minute she said it, I was like, Hyman's Post, no, it's not going to be a thing, Miss Suzette. I don't know about that. So I wanted to make sure that, like I said, about, operating from a place of humanity, I want you to understand, I understand also all the intersectionalities, all the things that you deal with as a person, trying to manage all these hats, unlearn things, see things about yourself, plus still having to go out there and sacrifice yourself. Because even though we live in a city that isn't as, crime-ridden as a lot of places I've lived in my life, you never know. The one day, the one incident, the one time. So I understand the amount of pressure that was put onto you and the things that you're expected to dismantle that was set up before you were even a police officer, before you were even born, before your mother even was born. So the reason why it's important for us to know this, because even after we finish this presentation, you're not going to leave this room and be like, yeah, I got it. Malcolm X, that's my guy. It's not going to be that person. You're not going to be that person, but it will hopefully give you the tools and the resources to see things differently, to understand things differently, and hopefully make the changes that are needed and necessary so we could grow together as a community, so we can actually protect and serve the entire community. And that's why I needed to go back to that because of that purpose. So we're going to move over to the next slide. Now, priming and racial bias. I'm going to go to the next slide. Like I just said before, these things were set up before you were even born. We could go back to even the 1930s. We look at Mickey Mouse here. This is things that your grandparents or great-grandparents would have watched. There's a picture of Mickey with blackface on 1933, and then we go over to the 1940s. We're looking at the little girl that with the hoops and the earrings and the attitude and the dark skin, bending down, holding the huffs of the girl with the white blonde hair that we go over. So this is sending messages to your parents and your grandparents. Then we go over to Dumbo, Jim Crow. As we know, the Jim Crow laws in America was a segregation law. There were crows that ate chicken and had this broken English that were the crows of black men were black men were being exemplified as crows in this show, and was called the Jim Crow. The leader was called the Jim Crow. Over to the next slide, please. Then the 1950s, I want to show you as far as we could go back with Peter Pan and the Red Indians, the Red Men, and then Mammy May and Tom and Jerry in the 1960s, in the Jungle Book, with the monkeys being portrayed as black men and how black men are supposed to act. And then blackface with Bugs Bunny in the 1960s. Then we go to the next slide. 1970s with Shango the Aristocrat, and Charlie Brown in 1965, where the little black boy was on the table by himself and everybody else was on the other side. and Sebastian the Crab imitating how Jamaican men and Jamaican people act. And then we look at the Smurfs in 1980s with blackface. We look at 1989, how the Simpsons, how Indian people are supposed to look and act. And then we look at what's being store owners and having a bunch of kids and staying home. Like, these are the things that was taught to our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our parents, ourselves. Because as we go into the 1990s, I was born in 1991. So I grew up watching Rugrats. Here you have Susie pulling out the fridge, smiling with grape juice and fried chicken. These are the things that we were told as normalizations. And we have blackface in Dragon Ball Z, but the one that really stood out for me was in 2000. I used to love The Proud Family. The Proud Family was my jam. But in the 2000, and while watching it, I remember going to school, and I used to be bullied in school. In the Caribbean, because the majority race is Black people, you don't experience racism as frequently, but what you do experience is colorism and elitism. Now, being someone that my mother grew up in the ghetto, in the hood as we call it, but my mom worked her butt off. I remember her working and going to school at night, and I had to sleep in the back of her car so while she could finish classes. So my mom saw what she grew up in and tried to do everything she could do to make me have a better life. Before I came to Canada, she did everything she could do. But I was bullied in school because I was dark-skinned, and I was a tall girl. So I get picked on. I would be called monkey, ape, whatever word you could think of. I was called that in school. So in 2000, when the Gross Sisters, which are kids of Jamaican immigrants in the show, they're called the Gross Sisters, plus size, tall, and you ever heard the saying that says you're Black till you're blue? Like you get a black eye that's blue till you're Black? That's a racial, just so you know, if you ever heard that thing where saying, oh, that's blue and black. It's saying that someone is so Black till they turn purple or blue. So they made them blue to show how dark they were. And in the show, they were the bullies. They always steal. They always were begging. This was the priming and association of what Caribbean people are. And I used to watch that, and I used to see myself in the girl in the middle as a little girl. And for years, that was my thought of myself. And to be real with you, still is. On a lot of services, still is. I have to fight it every day. For years, I used to, as I said, I want to be very transparent. For years, I used to get dressed in the dark. I would hate looking at myself because I would see all the problems with me. I would see every scratch, every bruise, every stretch mark, everything that you could possibly see wrong, it would be shown in me. And I was seeing that from the things. And this is just one way I was primed. My society was the next thing. The movies were the next thing. And you will see that as we go. So as we go through another slide, we look at now ads. And if you look at the ads, there's the one in the 1952 that says, 4 out of 5 of these men want Oxfords in their new Van Hosen. And the one in the middle says he will even trade his boar and his hammer to get a Van Hosen shirt. If you look at his face and look at everybody else's face, it's very particular how the words, and I wish I had time to go more into language. That's a whole nother conversation that we don't have time for today, but I kind of wanted us to look at these things. But the number one thing when I do this presentation and have this conversation, people think in their mind, well, shoot, it's the 1930s. Of course they were racist. Of course they're like this. We're not like this. We're cool, we're hip, we're liberated. Let's go to the next slide. 2016. 2006, 2015, 2018 with the H&M advertisement where the little Black boy was given the coolest monkey shirt to wear. In 2017 with the Dove commercial where the dark-skinned girl is not clean until she's taken off and now she's a white woman. In 2017 where the dark girl was put on the side, say before and then after, as you get cleaner, you become white. So if you notice, and this is why even again, when we look at the language and the word BIPOC, this is a physical representation of how BIPOC is so racist because it creates a racial hierarchy, Black being at the bottom, then anybody that's not Black, and then white, base, and then other. These are the representations of words that we use so easily, but to show you what it actually means. In 2014, others fell flat. Some other hill folks were born to dance. These are the things. 26, as you could see, that's a Black girl being held. Her face is being held up by the throat by a white woman. 26, these are 2006. And if you can't see it properly, or you're not focused on it, these are the images that are sold to you that you're normalizing in your brain without even knowing the information that you're taking in. So I want us to look at now, like I just explained my story about priming and association and how I felt about myself. I wanted to play a video next and I know that there's a context about, well, sure, this is an America problem. So I particularly went and found a video of children in Italy. And let's see what happens to children in Italy after being primed.
All right, everybody, we are back, and here is the video.
Okay. So this, like I said, is looking at the priming in children, and I particularly picked Italy, so we could take out our mind this is an American problem.
Quale bambola è bianca? Quale bambola è nera? Quale delle due è bella?
Questa.
Qual è quella bella? Qual è quella brutta? E qual è quella buona? Quale è cattiva? Qual è buona? Perché è buona?
Perché ha gli occhi celesti.
Quale è cattiva? Perché è cattiva?
Perché è tutta nera.
E qual è la bambola che ti somiglia di più? Quale bambola è nera?
È offeso. Tu.
Oh no, like she.
Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Perché mi hai chiamato nero? Mi offende perché altri bambini mi hanno offeso con cattiveria.
Io non ho usato nessuna cattiveria.
Questo mi sta guardando storto.
So you notice how she said you're offending me because you called me Black. All my life, that's what we, especially as a Black girl, was told. It's offensive to be Black. It's dirty to be Black. We go into language. If you look at black clouds, black ball, black pit, black hole, black male. The word Black over since the word was created was always associated with dirty, angry, ugly creatures. This is how us as Black children was primed to feel. The things that was associated with us now perpetuate that or cement that. And then when we have those assumptions come to us from external people, it now becomes a reality for us. And the thing is, because what we have to remember, I think when we talk about policing or the healthcare or the school system or any system, when we talk about systemic systemic racism, we also have to talk about systemic racism, and we'll go into this later, is policies, procedures, and protocols, things that was put in place, systemically put in place. But structural racism, the infrastructure in which it dwells, is another thing. But what we oftentimes, the simple key and the simple fact of the matter is, before we're police officers, before we're doctors, before we're lawyers, before we're mothers, before we're fathers, we're human beings. So when we have this expectations that all of a sudden, because you're police, you are no longer a human, that means the ability of being racist or sexist or anything else becomes not a thing. Or when you're a doctor, you are no longer a human. So the ideas of having all these other things that you as a human being can be becomes not a thing. So we have to realize that we're talking to humans here, not robots. The difference between a police officer, a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, whoever in our community that has signed up as a duty to protect, to serve, to teach, to nurture, that you have to identify your biases. You have to identify how the way you think and act and grow can affect the job that you signed up to do. That's the difference between those that is here to serve and the average person on the street. The average person on the street did not say, I'm here to protect and serve or to nurture our children or to defend or to give justice. You did. So once you sign up for that job, you now have the fiduciary duty and the responsibility to do what is necessary and what you must to do that job right. And that's the reason why we're having this conversation. This is a conversation that every human being should have, that every person can struggle with. But it's important because once you're giving, there's a verse in the Bible that says, too much is given, much is required. So the minute you are giving that power, the minute you're giving that authority, the minute you say, I'm swearing in to protect and serve, not some people, but all people, those biases that you've been primed, that you've associated, that you've assumed, those feelings, those experiences has to be managed. You notice I didn't say dismantle and unlearn. It has to be managed because that is how deep and enrooted it is. I could listen to someone talk and I could pick up 100 things you said that was wrong and oppressive. I choose not to. I listen to people talk every day. I'm like, that was racist. That was oppressive. That's sexist. That's weird. Why would you say that? I think of these things because that is how my brain is built. But because I understand that this person is going through a journey, because this person don't understand, they don't, like I said, all the ramifications, all the consequences, they come with good intentions, but their impact does not show their intentions. I choose to move and operate with love and with grace and with understanding because I understand how deep it is. But on that person on the other side has to take the responsibility. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to whether you want to change or you don't. I could go through 100 different presentations, 100 different conversations, 1,000 billion people could die. If you choose not to change, nothing will stop you to do whether you're doing it good or doing it bad. So I hope that kind of explains further. It really comes down to you as a person. So now we're going into association. Is everybody seeing the slides okay on their end? Apparently I can't see. I just have to do it from the computer. But does everybody have it up? You're not seeing it from our sleep, but it's on your email.
Yeah.
If you go to your email.
And open it up.
Yeah.
Greg.
You just have
The
to
Lord
tell
gave
us
me the
when you
thumbs
change
up.
slides.
Sorry?
You just have to tell us when you change slides, because
Okay,
some of us
okay.
can't follow.
All right, so I'm gonna be saying as we go, right?
Yeah.
We're just gonna have to make this work, y'all. My bad. I don't know what's going on. There's somebody in the air just like, we ruining. I smell change happening in this room. I smell chains being broken literally, and we just go stop it, but we not going. This is what adversity looks like, and we just gonna go over it. Anyways, so quick story. So when we talk about language quickly, so if I was supposed to tell you, on my way here today, I saw an alligator in a pink three-piece suit riding a tricycle on the highway with a hat and some pom-poms in his hand. Who here could visualize that in your head? Just raise your hand if you saw it. You just had to see a picture. Did you see that? Did you see it? The pink, the alligator tricycle? Is your logic stopping it? Like, this is not logical shoe, so I can't see it.
That would be him, actually. Yeah, definitely.
But could you see it?
Yeah.
But could you see it?
Yeah.
You could see a picture come up, right? Nobody, could anybody could see that? I'll repeat it again. On my way here, I saw an alligator in a 3-piece pink suit riding a tricycle on Deerfoot. Can everybody see that? Or some people? We could see that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. I want us to pay attention to how language works. So now I'm going to throw out a couple words. And you don't have to tell me what you see, but I want you to pay attention to what you think. Can we do that?
Mm-hmm.
So the first couple of words are curry, spicy, white cloth, head wrap. Is there an image that comes up in your head? You don't have to tell me, just not if it does. Okay. Next, gold chains, loud music, iced out grills. Did an image come in your head? You don't gotta tell me, but just nod your head if it did. Did it? Did an image come in your head? Let's be real. I was real with y'all. Can y'all gonna be real with me? Or is it just gonna be me being the only real one in here? Okay. Beaches, dreads, banana tree, jerk chicken. Is there an image that comes in your head? Yes.
Yeah.
Braids, full lips, cocoa butter. Is there an image that comes in your head? Khaki shorts, golf shirt, baseball hat. Is there an image that comes in your head?
Yeah.
This is what association in racial bias looks like. So we're going to go to the slide, that first slide that says association racial bias. So remember how we were talking about priming? Now we just threw out some words and you were able to see a person or a thing. Now you're associating those words with a person or a thing. Can anybody say that's actually what happened to them in this moment, in this room? Yes? Nobody? Yes? Yes?
Yep.
Ms. Arvo? You know it did.
It did.
It did. It did. She's like, no, I'm not going to give you the satisfaction. It did. We know it did. And then the same thing when we look at the slide here. This is how Black children in Africa has been associated with poverty, hunger, dirty. These are the images that we see, suffering. For years and years, the UN used these images. Give $1, save a child. And noticeably, there's always a non-Black person feeding a Black person in these videos. None of these things are done by chance. Racism is deeper than what we think it is, and we're going to get into that. It is strategically done and placed. So we think it is something that just a kind of a whatever thing. We have way much more to think and unlearn than we think we do. So we go to another slide. Association, when you look at Black women, loud, ghetto, twirling our hands. This is how we act. Now, this is how I act, but I know a couple Black girls that don't. But this is what is associated. When you to the point where there's a lot of times I'm having conversation with people and it's like, okay, sister girl, queen, because they automatically assume that that is what I'm going to reciprocate, not knowing I'm a whole activist and I'm going to look at you like, no, don't do that. But this is what has been normalized as this is how Black girls act. And this is how, if I want her to understand what I'm saying, this is how I have to act. We look at the movie Tower Heist with Eddie Murphy. He was a star in the movie, but what was his role? He was a thief and a liar and a pimp. And when the non-Black people had to like fight against him because he wanted to steal all the money and run away with it. These are the things that has been associated with people, with Black people. And I mostly could only speak for a Black person because that is who I am, right? I'm sure if you talk to other people, they'll have their own personal stories. And then we go into another slide. The movie, The Help. That's who our ancestors, our grandmothers were considered to be. We were maids. We were the help. We were the mammies. We were the caregivers. Then we have in the middle, that's Calypso. So Calypso is a Trinidadian, Caribbean type of carnival, but she was called Calypso. She was a voodoo priestess that had black teeth and was dirty and spoke like a Jamaican would speak, and it was very crafty. These are the associations put to when I moved here. I'm sorry, I'm just cutting in. I can't tell you how many times I was asked, do you guys live in a banana boat? Does your grandmother practice voodoo? When I tell people the story even about my aunt and she said I was gonna, they're like, oh yeah, I know Caribbean people, they be seeing things in the future. These are the things that is then who's associated. So it's like becomes a known fact. It's a proven fact that this is what it is. But then we go into things that are not so obvious. Like we look at Pontus of the Ape. Caesar, and how I knew for a fact, Caesar's wife and Caesar would wear tribal markings associating with African tribal in the deep desert. And his wife in the last movie wore a beaded shell around her head. So there were small little things that is put in to associate with things that you don't even understand, that you're being trained to think this is how, and they had, even though they were played by white actors, they had black personas. And they were caged and they need to be controlled. And one of the monkeys had to protect this poor little white girl that lost her way in the woods. These things are not done by chance, but is put there to strategically associate certain characteristics and what must be done to a certain people in these situations. And this is just the one way that is mass produced is media. So that's where you mostly see these things. And then your parents and your family perpetuate this. Then we go to the approval of racial bias. So now when we look at racial bias, instead of going into just looking at assumption, approval is the next step that happens after assumption. This is when now racial bias is now being scientifically proven. This is not just what we see on TV, what our parents has told us, but science has also told us that Black people are subhumans, that Indigenous people are subhumans. We look at the Darwin theory. So this is where a lot of these scientists draw this theory from, that the evolution of man, but the Black man stopped at the third, where he's still part monkey, but then part human. So he become a subhuman. And in the university, I'm just going to read this quickly. I won't read all of it. But in the University of the Ferris State University, the Jim Crow Museum says, are Negroes closer to apes than humans? The Negro skull, in addition to having a smaller brain volume and thicker carnal bones than one of white, and a lower face that projects it forward to the manner of an animal's muzzle. The Negro jaw is substantially longer and relatively to its width. So it's now giving the study of how our brains and our structure is those of an ape. And they're using scientific proofs to say that this is not just our opinion. Science has told us that you're subhumans. And these are the things that was passed down from generation to generation. So we move to the next slide, which is another video. So I wanted to show you, if you think I'm just saying this to say this, I want to show the next video. So the next video we're going to be looking at is the Great Gatsby scene in the Great Gatsby movie. Now, this is one of my favorite movies, but every time I watch this scene, my heart drops.
Play it.
I'm coming. That's Bob.
They're
I'm
eager.
coming.
They're like right now.
Here we go. Just give me a minute.
It's going to pass fast, so you have to listen.
Would you like to hear a family secret?
That's why I came over.
It's about the butler's notes.
Things went from bad to worse.
I hate that word, Hulk.
Nicky, I heard a rumor that you were getting married to a girl out west.
It's a libel. I'm too
They
poor.
have to be old so they're dying quickly.
Can't we talk about something else?
We are
Anything.
friends.
Crops. You're making me feel uncivilized, Daisy. Civilization going to pieces. Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empire? That is from Goddard. Everybody ought to read it. The idea is that it's up to us, the dominant race, to watch out of these other races who have control of things.
Sounds very profound lately. You read deep books with long words in them.
It's been proved. Scientific.
Stop right there. And if that wasn't enough for you, we're gonna go to the next video.
Who is your little friend? This is Ben. He's an old Joe that lived around here for a long time. And I do mean a long damn time. Old Ben here took care of my daddy and my daddy's daddy till they up and killed over one day. Old Ben took care of me. Growing up the son of a huge plantation owner in Mississippi puts a white man in contact with a whole lot of black faces. I spent my whole life here, right here in Candyland, surrounded by black faces. I seen them every day, day in, day out. I only had one question. Why don't they kill us? Now, right out there on that porch, 3 times a week for 50 years, old Ben here would shave my daddy with a straight razor. Now, if I was old Ben, I would have cut my daddy's goddamn throat, and it wouldn't have taken me no 50 years to do it neither. But he never did. Why not? See, the science of phrenology is crucial to understanding the separation of our two species. In the skull of the African here, the area associated with submissiveness is larger than any human or any other subhuman species on planet Earth. If you examine this piece of skull here, you'll notice 3 distinct dimples. Here, here, and here. Now, if I was holding the skull of an Isaac Newton or Galileo, these 3 dimples would be found in the area of the skull most associated with creativity. This is the skull of old Ben. And in the skull of old Ben, unburdened by genius, these 3 dimples exist in the area of the skull most associated with civility. Now, bright boy, I will admit you are pretty clever. But if I took this hammer here and I bashed in your skull with it, you would have the same 3 dimples in the same place as old Ben.
It's important to understand these things because we try to address racism and address creating policies, and we're trying to run to the finish line, going nowhere fast, without understanding the level of how this is embedded. This is our parents and our parents' parents and our parents' parents. That he said his daddy and his daddy. These are things that was taught to him, passed down, just like how you get passed down a hand-me-down. These ideas get passed down to children, not only from the movies and the things that you watch and the lessons that you learn at school, but your actual community tells you this consciously or subconsciously without even telling you. When you see this person, walk on the other side. Be careful of this. Just like it was done to people that have that are racist and operate in racism, it also applies to those who are affected by it, right? So I wanted to, the reason why it's important, and that's why I'm like, we can't ship any of these videos because it builds up the point. So the last video of the day, gentlemen, ladies and everyone, we're gonna play. So I wanted to kind of show how these, now we want to switch lanes and go into how does priming and racial priming and racial association, racial assumption, how does that now affect those who's on the other end of the spectrum? I wanted to show how it happens, but now we're going to go into how it affects the people, right? That face that suffers at the hands of racism.
Who I am. I'm tired of hearing black men are lazy. Disrespectful violence, absent. I think America's got this very interesting history with black men.
America views us one-dimensionally, and for the most part, it's in a negative way.
Comments I hate hearing about black men are, you grew up in the hood? You know Shawnee likes you because you're black. You must play basketball, right? Vacillates between extreme fear and extreme infatuation. Everyone wants to be black, but on the other hand, when it's time to be black, no one wants to be black because black men are monkeys, problems, thugs. That's not who I am. To me, being a black man in America means to be afraid. You have to subject yourself to being less than a human being in order for someone else to feel better about themselves. Whenever I see a white female on the street, if I'm walking behind her, particularly if it's late at night, I actually go out of my way to not only pass her, but to pass her as wide as I can so that she can see me clearly and so that she can see that I have nothing in my hands. I'm tired of hearing that we make up the hatred and mistreatment that we receive from people in power. The fact that if you're 15 years old and black and you're walking down the street with a hoodie on, you could be a target of some kind of harassment. I feel like we have targets on our backs. Black men are not just rappers, athletes. We're not all great dancers. Black men are intelligent, multifaceted individuals, compassionate, a person just like anybody else. This is who I am.
So it's important as we switch narrative, because this is now we're coming down to the part that if anything that I didn't say that you didn't take away, these last few slides that we go into is where I want us to be very keen. I mean, the whole thing, you should be very keen, because I would hope that even with all the mishaps and all the technical issues, that this allows us, everyone that's on this call and that will watch this recording, to start thinking and viewing things different than you did before. Will take a step back from yourself to remember that paper that you chugged earlier and see things from a different lens where you're actually being, like I said, change focused instead of results driven. Because when you are results driven, you are running nowhere fast. You're running to a goal that is not even there. So as we now look at what racial priming, racial association, the approval of racial biases, and we see, and I've shared my experience as a Black woman. We've heard the videos and I would just want to say, when he said America, he means North America, just so we be clear. This is not the United States of America. This is North America. This is a North America. This is a world, a universe issue. This is not just to one place and some place. I've lived in the Caribbean, the States, and here, and it's the same thing, just to be very clear. So as we now go into, now we've seen the movies, we've seen the shows, we've seen the actors, but what when it comes down to the true documentary of showing you what actually happened? So if we change to the next slide, when we look at the 13th, looking at the 13th Amendment, and I invite everyone to watch this on Netflix. Our 12 years of slavery, we're talking about overseers and slave catchers who catched a man who was free and then sold him back into slavery, tearing up his free papers, and he had to fight through that whole experience again for 12 years. Or we look at sorry, this thing is this, wait, am I muted? Can you hear me? The Fruitville Station. These are real stories that happen. that shows how Black men are prototyped and how they are assumed to be criminals, and what happens when you look a certain way and you dress a certain way. And then we go into, the next slide. When we look at the story, everything is just breaking down today. Oh no, who's trying to stop this? But we gonna finish it anyway. When we look at the story of Khalil Broder, someone that was wrongly accused of stealing a purse and then was sent to Rikers prison for several years, and the depression and what he went through in that prison system, he came out and committed suicide. Or we look at the Birth of a Nation. I just watched that again a couple nights ago, when they used religion and God. The first thing they did was paint God to be blue-eyed and blonde hair, and told the slaves that this is who you are supposed to serve because this is your superior. And the story of Birth of a Nation looked how the slave owners to try to quiet down rebellion would take Nate and take him to all these different plantations to preach to the slaves, to say, you should listen to your master. The white man is in charge. This is who's your authoritative figure. Listen to these people. That is what this is, a real story. Or when we look at Queen and Slim, which is not necessarily a real story, but a collection of all real stories, where a young Black lawyer goes on a Tinder date, gets pulled over by police. The police starts to beat up the Black man. She comes out to help. She gets a gun, shoots a police, but they're in a state where if they get charged for killing a police, they get the lethal injection. So they go on a run. These are real things that as young Black men and Black women, and we're watching, we're seeing, this is what can happen to me. These are things that have been proven to has happened. These are not things that just came out the air. And this is how we on the other end is being constantly primed, constantly having an association, constantly in a fear of saying, I've seen this happen from as long as I remember to now. I can't even say this is a 1930s, 1920 thing. This movie came out in 2019. I could see myself in these characters, and it's a scary place to be on that side of the fence. And then we go into, what about when our family, our grandmothers, her great-grandmothers can now show us, and there's pictures and artifacts of what actually transpired. This is in the 1950s, around the segregation time. This is the picture right here first picture that pops up. That picture is an album of the Roots album. That picture, every time I look at it, to just see the fear and the fright. And then we go and we continue. The picture on the third, that's the year I was born, 1991. That's a beating of Rodney King. So when we're trying to tell the community that this isn't a real thing, or that this isn't what all police officers do, we know that. But when you look back at what has historically happened throughout our lives and what continues to happen, it goes against what is being told to us. And then if somebody might argue, well, shoot, this is the 1950s again. That's a lot of times what I hear people. This is back in the day. This is not a real thing. But before we get to that, I want to talk about this picture with this young man getting the dog being sicked, as we called on him. I have a terrible fear of dogs. I will not go, like, if a dog is like over there and I could see it, I will like pass out right here. That's how deep it is. The sound of a dog collar makes me throw up. That's how deep it is. And where this started from was two places. One, when I was a child, there was a Rottweiler, or what is this dog? What are these dogs called again? German Shepherd. I had a neighbor that had a German Shepherd who would sit quietly, and as soon as you came into the house, would chase you. And one time the dog bit me. But aside from being physically attacked, and this, I want you to pick up what I'm going down the road. Aside from being physically attacked by a dog and having that emotion scarred, my mother would tell me, stay away from dogs. They will bite you. They will chase you. If you see a dog, go the other way. Don't go anywhere on the road. Dogs are bad. The same way now I have a physical confirmation and an emotional confirmation. That is how us as Black people have of police or any authority figure. There is a physical, we could see it, And then our parents is also telling us. I remember when I was like, don't go out too late. I would hear my aunt tell my cousins, listen, y'all better be in the house by 10 o'clock. Don't wear dark colors. Don't hang out on the corners. Be careful of the friends you keep. If you see a police car, run. There is a known fact amongst a lot of Black people. If you see a Black person running right now, everybody who's Black is running with them. Miss Avril knows. We're like, whatever they're running from, we need to run too. We were taught to run, to fight, flight trauma, fight it or run from it. Do not stay, because if you stay, they're gonna kill you. And if they kill you, they're gonna get away with it. So it doesn't matter if we're guilty or we're innocent, we are going to run. I have never been personally tackled or arrested by a police officer, but every time before I start working with the CPS, I still get used to saying that. Before I was in here so much, I would, no matter where I was, because that was imprinted into me by my mother, by my grandmothers. And then when I saw my cousin get killed by a police officer for wrong identification, that's cemented. When I see my cousin get locked up for 30 years for a bag of weed, that cemented it. So it's hard now to tell me that if I'm in a certain situation, that this will not be my results. This is how association and approval and assumption works. So then when we go into nowadays, this is just last year, and I'm very particular, I'm very strategic. These pictures are not all from America too. This is England, this is all over Europe, this is everywhere. Because I wanted to show that these are not just pictures of the 1950s and the 1980s or in America. This is all over the world. This is what, when we look at how our interaction with police will be, this is what we assume it will be. And because this has frequently happened, you can't tell us otherwise. And you see it again and again. These are the images that are kept. People don't care. Let me tell you one thing about when you're talking about community. They don't care about the backstory. They don't care about the protocol. They don't care about the procedures. They don't care why it happened. They care about what they're seeing. They care about what their child experienced. They care about what they're experiencing. They don't care about nothing before and after. They don't want to hear it. They want to not see this. And even though there's pictures like this, the first picture is at the protest is last year with 12 for Calgary officers, and pictures like the ones next to it. And pictures where police are standing hands in hand, arm to arm with civilians and praying with them and comfort. This picture actually went viral of a little boy giving out free hugs, hugging a police officer. Even though we know that there are bad people that are police officers, and I'm very particular in saying that, we also know that they're good. But this is not what is associated with police. This is not what has been historically associated from the time of slave catchers and plantation overseers and mass imprisonment. This is not what is associated with law enforcement universally, not just Canada, not just America, but just everywhere. So how do we now get to a place where this can be associated, where the true honor of who people and what you have protected, put on the uniform to protect and serve and put your life at risk? How can we make sure that that intention has that impact on the community? It happens by change. The best remedy for mistrust is change actions. Because if we're gonna say, well, shoot, again, this is all America in the States, this is not what people think when they think about cases like Godfred, when they think about cases like Dahlia Kofi, when they see those videos and pictures. They're saying it's here too. When they see the picture that happened with Kobe, they don't want to hear. I could go and try to explain the backstory, and this is what they're just seeing what they see. And what they see is backed up by what they were told. And what they were told has been proven from time before they were born. It's easier, like Albert Einstein said, to prune an atom to get rid of prejudice and racism, because it's been cemented in our mind. Run. You're at danger. Your life is at danger. You will die. The law will protect them. You're not protected. They're not here for you. That is what our parents tell us. That is what the movies tell us. That is what history tells us. That is what everything tells us. We don't have an alternative things to turn to, be like, no, that's not true, because here, here, and here. No, that is not what is associated. This is what is associated. So then we go into and we're almost done. I know we're at 3:00, but I want to just finish up. Then we go into the question, because this is the part that I want to make sure everybody walks away with today. Having racial bias, does that mean that you're racist? Now, there is this narrative that racism, and in the dictionary, if y'all ever invited me back here to do another part 2, the dictionary, I don't know why we think racism, if we look at systemic and structural racism, that it was just going to hit us in some parts. It found everywhere to be, including very much so our language. Matter of fact, racism strives in language. That is how it's easily passed on from generation to generation, is through language. So the first thing, and then one thing I want you to understand is that the idea that racism is me not liking you because of the color of your skin is not racism. Let us put that aside. That racism is not liking someone because of the color of their skin. That ain't racism. That is prejudice. What racism is something much deeper, much dangerous, much violent, and much harder to get rid of than we make it to be. So if we move to the other slide, we'll look at what racism is. Racism is an social economic structure that one races give them the power, resources, and privilege to cause harm, death, or disenfranchise another person because of their race and get away with it. You have to understand that racism is not just, I don't like you and you don't like me. If my race does not give me the power, the privilege, the resources to harm you, to disenfranchise you, to discredit you, to do whatever I could do to you and get away with it, I'm not operating in racism, because I could not like you. I could not like you from outdoors. If I can't do nothing to you, that's just me and my feelings. But the minute you can do something, the minute the society has given you the power and the privilege to do something because of your race and because of mine, that is when it becomes harmful. And that is what racism is. And that is why we cannot minimize this thing. The number one example I like to talk to people, and I'm going to wrap it up real quick, is when the Spaniards, the Spanish queen, said to Christopher Columbus, I need you to go and travel and bring me back some jewelry and land and whatever. What did she do? She gave him the Pinta, the Ninta, and the Santa Maria, the resources, the power to go so, and the tools, the guns to go and take the land. That is the birth of racism. I have to have these things to be able to disenfranchise people. So if I don't have the power, the resources, or the privilege, then how are you gonna call me racist? That's how deep racism is. Racism is a doing thing. And it happens through our laws, our societal norms, our policies, our procedures, our protocols, and the approval of racial bias. So as we wrap up, I just want to break down racism real quick, and then we're done. Last 2 slides. Interactional racism, that's the day-to-day racism. That's where we talk about gaslighting, microaggressions, macroaggressions. Systemic racism, that's our policies and procedures. And structural racism, that is the infrastructure that they breathe through, that they strive through. So this is how it all works together. It starts from our priming. So if you go to how it all works together, our priming, our association and assumptions, that's our TV, our family, all the things that we think we need to run, we need to fight, right? Then we see the historical policies and practices to know that this is why we have to act in this way. And then the infrastructure that keeps it alive is structural racism. So racism is, as I said, is way more deeper than it has chopped up to be. A lot of times we talk about systemic racism, but we don't talk about structural, which holds the systems. And we don't talk about the implicit interactional racism, where that perpetuates the policies. Like, you have to look at things at a 360 view to make a 180 change. So I'll leave this analogy for another time. I know we're running late. It's 5 minutes over. In my defense, there was a lot of stopping and starting, and there's a lot of things. So I felt like I deserve to have another half an hour, but okay. Because this analogy was a good analogy, but we're going to talk about that another time. I wanted, before I wrap up, if there's any questions. if any comments, and then that would happen in the next couple of minutes, and then hopefully we could meet again and part two, because there's so much more, so much more to unpack.